Hi everyone. As you know, the focus of tonight's class is observation. In some ways, it's the most important class. It's certainly one of the most important skills for a teacher. Think about why observation is so critical in our work. In this class, we're going to review different observational techniques, and I'll give you a few tips for observing. I recognize that some of you may have already been trained in observation, so this is a chance to hone or enhance your skills. And obviously, you can skip over the parts that are redundant for you. This class also includes video clips of children for you to observe. I'm going to ask that you practice observing and recording your observations. Please download several copies of the observation training form from the Moodle. Bring your completed forms to class next week and we'll discuss it. Next week, I'll also answer any questions you have about your observation assignment, which is due on October 18th. Let's get started. What is observation? Observation is taking in information through the senses, noticing, paying attention, careful and thoughtful watching what is happening. Observation is primarily done through seeing and hearing, but it can also be accomplished through touching, smelling, and tasting. Think about your sixth sense, your instincts, your guts. That's very important in our interactions, but they're not part of our true observations. Observations ideally are objective. They are measurable and quantifiable, and ideally they're written down, they're documented to share with others and also to compare a series of observations over time. For science, observation has a few goals. It's to describe behavior, to explain, to predict, and to control. In the case with children, I'd say our goal is really to influence behavior. Let's talk about the difference between observation and inference. Very, very important, a critical part of our work. Observations are objective. You describe exactly what is happening, what can be seen or heard, what is taken in through your senses. It's a behavioral description. Here's an example. Johnny walks over to the ball and picks it up with two hands. He lifts it high in the air and tosses it in the direction of Jennifer. The ball hits Jennifer in the stomach. Now let's think about what inferences are. They are subjective. They are an interpretation of what happened. They include your opinions, judgments, feelings. That's where your gut instincts come into play. Here's an example of an inference. Johnny picked up the ball, took aim, and purposely hit Jennifer in the stomach. If we mix up our inferences and our observations, then our observations are not objective. And they're not really that useful. Inferences are extremely valuable, but they must be separated from your behavioral descriptions. Later on, we're going to practice distinguishing between observations and inferences. Now let's talk about the observational process. There are a number of steps or stages in the process. The first is planning. You want to think about ahead of time what is the purpose of your observations. You want to set goals for your observations, and based on your goals you're going to select or design a specific method of observation. You're going to decide who you're observing, what exactly you're observing, where, when, and for how long to observe. The second step in the process is objective observation or documentation. Here's where you record what you see, what is seen, what is heard. The third step is interpretation. This is what gives meaning to the data. Why do you think the child behaved in such a way? Did the learning activity match the needs of the child? Was the teacher's tone appropriate? Here is your chance to give your opinion, judgment, and this is very important. Step 4 is your assessment or recommendations. Based on your interpretations of the objective observation, what's the best way to intervene? What does the child need? Behaviorally, physically, cognitively, emotionally, socially? And the last step is intervention or follow through. Here's where you coordinate your efforts with all those involved, which hopefully include families, teachers, it may include the child, maybe therapists, nannies. It's very important that the observation doesn't end at this point and that we go back and perhaps re-observe. So this process is really cyclical. Now we're going to talk about the context. The context is what surrounds the observation. All the behavior that you observe is dependent upon the context. The context enables us to assign meaning to the behavior. It helps to explain it. All context includes the setting and the situation. The setting is the physical space. Your objects, materials, equipment, how those objects are arranged in that space. Think about how the environment affects children's behavior, how it either hinders opportunities or creates opportunities for learning and interactions. The situation is your social or psychological part of the interaction. It deals with people. How many people, adults and children, are in the room? Think about how they influence the behavior of the subject of your observation. What is going on? How are the people interacting? Why is observation important? It helps us understand children, their needs, their wishes, their interests, their concerns, how they communicate. It helps us to have appropriate expectations for them. It helps us appreciate and respect children. And most importantly, it helps us to build relationships. Observation ideally guides all our teaching and subsequently all learning that takes place in the classroom. It helps us to develop appropriate educational goals. Observations are critical for our conferences with parents and as well as our communications with colleagues. And for the purpose of this course, we're going to focus on why observation is so critical for our intervention with disciplinary situations. When we think about the appropriate observational method to choose, ideally it should match the observer's style, skills, and point of inquiry. What is the purpose of your observation? In some cases, it depends on the constraints of the room, how much space, how much time. Is the observer also in charge of the children? Are the children in free play, or are they in need of the teacher's attention and care? With a participant observation, your interpretations and reflections will come later. In many cases, you might use a number of observational techniques to find just the right combination of data. The first observational technique is the narrative, also known as a running record or specimen description. With a narrative, you write down all that you see as it occurs. The more detail you write, the better the observation is. You write not only what you see, but you write the context of the description as well. With a good narrative, it's very, very important to distinguish between your inferences and your objective behavior. You don't want to mix those up. A narrative is the most rich data, full of a lot of information. There is no preparation needed to do a narrative. All you need is a piece of paper and a pen. In some ways, it's considered the most difficult because you are writing so much. The narrative is my favorite observation because it provides a comprehensive picture of the child and the situation. A checklist is an observational technique where you simply note whether a behavior exists or does not exist. With checklists, the items or the categories of behaviors or skills are set up or written ahead of time. In many cases, observation checklists do not include a context description or a section to interpret the behavior. You might notice that in my book, the checklist does include both the context and interpretations because we determined that those were important pieces of the entire observation. A good checklist is totally dependent on how well written items are. Later on in the semester, we're going to have a chance to evaluate various observational tools, and you'll see how important that is for the checklist to be well written and clear. A checklist can be recorded while the behavior occurs or can be recorded afterwards. It's very easy to complete because all you're doing is checking it off, and it provides the flexibility that many teachers like. Frequency counts are really an extension of a checklist, and they document how often that behavior occurs, not just if it occurs, but how many times it occurs. Typically, you're going to monitor a specific behavior, and you keep a tally count. With a frequency count, it's critically important to operationally define the behavior, clarifying exactly the behavior to be observed. For example, if you're looking at aggressive behavior, it might include biting, hitting, shoving, perhaps verbal interactions. If you're observing crying, you want to note that you're observing both purposeful crying and random crying. With a frequency count, you need to record behavior as it naturally occurs. Again, there's typically no context information. Very easy to do. The only prep is to operationally define or clarify the behavior to be observed. A rating scale is also called a Likert scale or a Likert type scale. Behavior is rated usually on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 7. An example: child engages positively with peers during group work time, and you would rate the behavior as 1, never, 2, occasionally, and so on. Typically, rating scales are completed after the behavior happens. Often no context description. Again, it's dependent on how well the items are written, and it's very easy to complete. Anecdotes are the most commonly used observation technique for teachers. Teachers simply describe any behavior episode. They focus on anything of interest or of concern to them. The teacher must develop a system for organizing the anecdotes: a box, files, a notebook. Some teachers find it easy to record their anecdotes and then transcribe them later. Usually, anecdotes are not written when the students are there. They're written up afterwards. And typically, behavioral descriptions and inferences are mixed up in anecdotes. I suggest that you keep them separate. In a time sampling, the observer watches and records behavior during preset periods of time. The observer defines the time period, when and for how long. You might have regular intervals. For example, you're going to observe 1 minute every hour, or perhaps it will be the first minute of every hour. You may also have randomly selected times. I'm going to observe 5 times throughout the day. With time sampling, you can collect a lot of data over a shorter period of time and in many contexts. And you can combine time sampling with other methods. You might have a time sampling narrative, or a time sampling checklist, or a time sampling frequency count. Event sampling simply means you specify an event or behavior to observe, and you only observe that behavior. Once again, you must operationally define what that event or behavior is. Event sampling is a practical, time-efficient way, and like the time sampling, it can be combined with other methods like the checklist, narrative, or frequency count. You might also combine event sampling with a functional behavioral assessment, where you record the ABCs, what happens before the behavior, the actual behavior, and the consequence of the behavior. The last method we're going to discuss is the diary description. It's the oldest method in child development. You're basically observing over extended periods of time in one child's life. So it demands close and continuous contact with one child. Diary descriptions are most often conducted with one's own child or family member. Piaget used the diary description in his development of his cognitive theories. Diary descriptions are often topical diaries. They focus on one specific area, for example, language development or social emotional development. Diary descriptions have rich detail and a breadth of coverage. However, they are not practical for teachers because you do not have the opportunity to observe a child longitudinally. Here are some tips for recording your observations. If you can't record your observations while you're observing because you're working simultaneously, be sure to record it immediately after so everything's fresh in your mind. Good times to observe are in between lessons or transition times. Those are common times when behavior problems occur. Also at the end of the school day when children are getting picked up. It's good to observe students when they're at specials, lunch, or recess, other downtimes when behavior problems often occur. Be sure to include in your write-ups of observations the date, the time, location, the age of the child, and any other relevant information about the context. Here's some general tips for observing. Acknowledge your own personal biases, values, and expectations that could influence your observations. It's better to be aware of them rather than to deny them. This way you can be cognizant of your biases and work really hard to not make them part of your objective observations. Be sure to respect children's confidentiality. Be very cognizant of when and with whom you're sharing your observations. Be sure to build observation time into your curriculum. It won't happen otherwise. And share the responsibility of observing with your colleagues. Let them know when you're observing. Also inform children about what you're doing so that they'll be comfortable with you observing. Observe children when they're involved in free playtime and when some are sleeping. Those are good times to practice participant observations. Whenever you can, schedule practice time so that you can hone your skills. Now it's time to practice recording observations with the observational training form. For each of the following 4 video clips, observe twice. The first time, observe everything. The second time, narrow your focus to one developmental area or one child.
Okay, go sit down. Go have a seat. Marty, you can have a seat now, love. Please, thank you. Come on, Jonathan. Move on up. Move up. Move up. Let's go. You know how to do it. Move up, Alonzo. Move up, Julia.
Julia. Mine. I play mine. Yeah? Okay. I play mine. Ow!
Huh? Okay, I don't want to hear any noise online. Jonathan, wants to get him back in the water. Go. Wait. Okay, go on and have a seat.
And Darius. You want to play with the playhouse over there?
Hey!
Oh, let's put them out. One at a time.
What is doing, buddy?
Where's the people for the playhouse?
What is doing, my Bobo?
There's the right. Darius, here's what you're going to do. Thank you. You want to play? Finish that? You can fix the car. Let me get to you, Laura. You better wrap it.
Well, we're going to cook the corn. We have to put it into hot
Dad,
water.
this part, Billy, feel this part. It feels like here. Look at that.
It feels like hair. What? That feels like hair. Benjamin, did you see the part? This part here, the corn silk. Do you have any corn silk on yours? Can you find the corn silk? Feel that and see what that feels like.
I feel the hair part.
The silk grows inside of the corn.
Look, I feel all the hair part.
You did. You got all the silk out? Great. What does it smell like?
What is this?
Did you smell it? This is the husk.
It smells like butter.
It smells like butter.
It smells like butter.
What do the other parts smell like? Oh, you got all the husk off and the silk. Smell the husk and see what that smells like.
Is it the husk?
Mm-hmm.
Look.
What does that smell like?
Soap.
It smells like soap. What do you think it smells like, Julia?
It's corn. It smells like soap.
Where'd you get it?
At my country house.
You did? You
And
have
Apple
to go to your
and Apple and Dad picked it up. Right, and gave it to Dad. Mine is the big. I took all the hair off.
You did a great job, Julia.
No, I'm not gonna cook it yet.
You're not? What is
Daniel, would you like
this?
to do another one?
It's the silk.
It grows inside the corn.
It does.
You found the I found the sail.
You
Gee,
found the
that smells
silk.
so
What does it
good.
feel like?
Hair, yeah. Feels like hair.
We are going to cook it for afternoon snack. We were just getting it ready. When you wake up, we'll boil it in water and eat it. What do you think we should put on it to eat it?
You can eat it.
Butter.
You can eat it, you have to cook it first.
Yeah.
You did a really good job, Julia. You took all of the husk and all of this corn silk off. That's great.
Thanks a lot.